everybody, Ben here from the Bonehead podcast, and welcome to Top 5 Friday. Every Friday we get together and we have a look at the top 5, normally to do with Blood Bowl, but last week I couldn't help myself and give my top 5 Games Workshop games currently active out there. Blood Bowl is, without a shadow of a doubt, unanimously decided the best game of all time produced by any company, including Games Workshop. But actually, Games Workshop have got some cool games kicking around at the moment as well, so I couldn't help but do that list. Now, off the back of that, we had a load of comments saying, hey, what about these old games? So it is now time for the Games Workshop top 5 out of production games. So we put a post up on the YouTube channel. We had a bunch of people comment. I put that together with the comments we got from the last videos. I'm going to go through my top 5, then we'll go through some of the other games and basically your top 5 as well. But let's have a look at the top 5 out of production Games Workshop games. Number 5 for me is Man of War, Born to Live Forevermore. So Man of War is Warhammer on the seas. Okay, so if you ever watched Hornblower and you just love naval combat, this was naval combat via the Warhammer style. And there was so much cool about this game. The models were amazing. They were insanely characterful. Okay, you had ships with cannons and mortars on that were literally the size of the ship. Like, it was ridiculous. The game looked like it was more of a token board game, but dude, it was dripping with theme, and the way the damage allocation worked was really clever as well. You can see that each one of these ships had like one of these boards and you had to roll and hit, and it was just a really clever game. Sadly, the game's layering of rules made it a little bit chunky and a little bit flabby as it moved on. It suffered from the classic Games Workshop staple, that of power creep, when the Nurgle fleet came along and just absolutely Nurgle stomped everybody. And then the Dark Elves arrived and did Dark Elf things like, I'm going to play a different game with my dragon ships. However, the game had dragon ships. I love naval combat games. I have not really played very many characterful ones, and Man of War brought that Warhammer element to cool sea-based combat. The rules were interesting. Some of it was clunky, some of it was not, and you had to have like a third of the board dedicated to damage chits and the boards for each of the models. There was a lot of elements here that actually would suck in the modern times. If they re-released Man of War as this, it would not be rated as a great game. But 25 years ago, this was super fun with some really super models. And Games Workshop kind of touched on it again when they went back and did Dreadfleet. The rules were massively different, I think. It was cool, the models were amazing, and then they never went anywhere. But I genuinely love the idea of having a fleet of fantasy ships, and you got to take your dwarves and your empire. It's so good. Now, Mantic have got a very thematically similar game out at the moment called Mantic Armada, which is naval fantasy combat set in the Mantic fantasy world. I'm not a massive fan of the rules. It's really interesting. Man of War was very cartoony rules. Okay, it was not like a crunchy war game at all, right? The Armada is a very it just feels a bit dry, whereas Man of War was all sauce. The Mantic Armada game seems like it's all bread. So it's an interesting one, and I'm really hoping that someone kind of lands something in the middle. Anyway, my number 5 is Man of War. My number 4 is Warmaster. Now, Warmaster was a bit of a flash of the pan when it came to Games Workshop games. It kind of dropped out of nowhere and loitered around for a couple of years and then just faded away, only to pop back into existence with the Battle of Five Armies, which was their Warmaster bit in The Hobbit. Really cool thing, but again, that popped up and then disappeared almost as quickly as Cursed City. Unlike Cursed City, this never came back. So Warmaster was a 10mm high-level command and control Warhammer game. The rules were really well put together, and that rule set is still in use. It's been copied and cloned. There was Warmaster Ancients. There is a Warmaster version of almost, I think, every version of combat out there. You've got Napoleonics, and the core of this went on to, I think, form Black Powder, which was produced by Rick Priestley, because this is a Rick Priestley game. Put Black Powder together, very similar things. Couple of amazing things about Warmaster were just how it looks. Like 10mm stuff is just sweet. It's just fun. When you've got the hordes of dudes on the pitch, it just looks amazing. You've got elves with like eagles, you've got dragons, you've got trebuchets and flame cannons and fleets of gyrocopters. It's such a cool thing. The downside of Warmaster, which was basically the core of this, is that very similarly to Blood Bowl, there was a turnover aspect. You can do a load of stuff, but at some point it's going to come crashing down on you. You had to kind of choose your actions wisely, which was really cool. The sad thing is once it ended, and sometimes you could go and have a turn and you couldn't really do a lot, and your opponent would just do a load of stuff. You could activate your units multiple times as well, so if you had a good rolling system, you could just move a bunch of dudes from here to here, and you may just roll double sixes and fail. There was a downside to it, but this has spawned, I think, one of the biggest third-party markets outside of Blood Bowl. There is 10mm fantasy everywhere. If you're a 3D printer, you are in luck, because this game, okay, Forest Dragon, Ankylo miniatures, just go look. It's amazing. But there's no core rulebook. There is a Warmaster rulebook. There's like 3 different versions. The community's done a great job. There's like this version, that version, this version. There's no united kind of Warmaster. It's become a bit fractious. But the great thing is with the basing, you can use it for all these different games, and then you can use it for Kings of War as well. And that is on my bucket list. That's on my gaming bucket list at the moment. I've got a whole bunch of high elves, a whole bunch of dwarves, a whole bunch of stuff. And I just need to get it painted and based so that I can play some Kings of War, so I can play something else. We've made games for this. We made a cool one called Smallhammer that was great fun. And the scale is awesome. It's not hard to paint. When they're based up, it looks brilliant. I love it. I would love to see this game come back. And when Games Workshop were like, we're going to bring the old world back as a game, there was a small part of me that was like, wow, what if they brought it back as 10mm? That would be phenomenal. But it's not what they're interested in doing. It was a really cool system. It was really fun. It looked great. Warmaster, just wonderful game. My number 4. Number 3 for me is Epic Space Marine Armageddon. Now, this is 6mm Warhammer 40,000. It started off in the 80s with a game called Space Marine. It then developed into Adeptus Titanicus, which has come back at a bigger scale in a big way. A very big way. See last week's video. Epic Armageddon, Epic 40,000 were all variants of the game that used exactly the same models and exactly the same basing, and it was exactly the same level of cool. I have to say, the Epic Armageddon rule set was actually genius. The Epic 40,000 one was fine. That one will form the basis for other Games Workshop games, but Epic Armageddon today is like one of the best combat systems. I absolutely flipping love it. In fact, me, Rick and Craig, we're building up some 8mm Heresy armies to play Epic Armageddon Heresy. The rule set is solid. There's a bunch of STLs out there. The printing of it, very easy. Anyway, as a bit of an aside, Epic was amazing. You had tiny Space Marines. Now this is the Epic 40,000 box set behind me. You had Orc vehicles, you had Gargants, you had Titans, Warhound Titans, you had Knights, you had more tanks. Just like a fleet of Bane Blades and Shadow Swords, and you had little tiny Dreadnoughts running around, ruffle stomping stuff, Marines, drop pods. If you like the 40k universe and you like war, this was just amazing. And it's such a shame because the Epic Space Marine, which was the first kind of additional Space Marine, then it became Epic Space Marine, was kind of underrated. The rules were not great. Then it turned into Epic 40,000, where the models were excellent, the vehicles were just brilliant, and their releases were great. But it didn't get a lot of traction because the rule set wasn't quite right. Then Epic Armageddon came out at what was essentially the sunset period of the specialist games. And it just kind of died. And it's such a shame, because the rules are brilliant. The way the blast markers work is just genius. It flows. It's alternating activation. Blood Tithe Ben loves that. Ben, listen. Alternating activation. Armageddon. Print a Space Marine army. 8mm. Come on. Let's do it. Adeptus Titanicus Heresy Scale Armageddon. Now you're talking. Anyway, this was multi-based, so you had like 4 or 5 Space Marines to a base, and the base was about the size of a 2p piece. You had like 4 Terminators, you had 1 Dreadnought to it, you had loads of Rhinos. Almost every race was represented as well. I don't think there was a lot of Necrons, but there was Tyranids, there was Orcs, there was Eldar, there was Space Marines, good Space Marines, naughty Space Marines, in the middle Space Marines. There were tiny Space Dwarfs for a while. It was wicked. It was just so cool. I had a bunch of it. We never played as much as I wanted because it was just like, oh, cool, I have a bunch of Orc Gargants. What are you going to do with them? I don't know. It doesn't matter. I've got loads of tiny tanks. Tiny tanks. I was sold at that point. Anyway, the reason this is so high up on my list is, one, the current rule set, Epic Armageddon, is being massively held alive and worked on by the community in a very similar way that kind of the Blood Bowl community looked after Blood Bowl. Net Epic, I think is what it's called now, Epic Armageddon, is being kept alive by the community. And it is a great system. It is a brilliant rule set for a brilliant models look. And this is got to come back. Adeptus Titanicus came back. They've made epic Titans again. But they've upscaled them to be bigger. And you know what? It looks amazing. Let's do that for this. It's got to happen. They brought the planes back in Adeptus Titanicus and then Aeronautica Imperialis. We've got to have Epic back. I want to have 8mm Baneblades, and I want to just be able to run them, and then they could unite the systems again and peace will be restored. Maybe. Anyway, tiny tanks, great system. Getting hold of a force now is really challenging. In fact, for Man of War and Epic Armageddon, actually buying the stuff, nah. Buying prints of the stuff, yes, but when it comes to Epic Armageddon, there's so many units that actually getting hold of the right STLs is actually quite challenging. The amount of tanks and stuff is very similar. It feels very similar to starting to get into... Imagine you were printing your own Flames of War, right? 15mm World War II. You could be like, oh, I've got a Rhino. Well, it's the wrong Rhino. It's got the wrong spoilers on it. It's too lowered. The lights are too bright. It's a strange one. Epic's got to come back. It's going to come back. Come on, Epic. Come back. Number 2 for me is Battlefleet Gothic. Space, the final frontier. These are the voyages of the Starship Apocalypse class battleship. Games Workshop makes some amazing IP. They love to stab others who consider using their IP. Really genuinely ruffle, stomp and foul and everything. Dirty Player plus 85 if you come close to using the word Space Marine in a sentence together. But, dude, their setting is amazing. A Battlefleet Gothic landed in a White Dwarf with cardboard spaceships. I remember getting this in a White Dwarf, and I remember sitting on Ian's floor, Ian's living room floor, and we had these little cardboard ships, and we played our very first game of Battlefleet Gothic. And then several months later, you had these plastic kits, and these ships were awesome. I've already said I love naval games. I love the idea of naval games, and I really genuinely love the idea of naval games in space with torpedoes and orcs and space marines running around and charging stuff. Battlefleet Gothic is just such a cool game. The ships, the look is amazing, and the rules for the time were really not bad. I am very worried that if Games Workshop brought Battlefleet Gothic back now, as it was then, it would be good. It would not be great. They took Adeptus Titanicus and they made it great. They took Blood Bowl and it was already great, and it stayed great. Battlefleet Gothic would need a bit of reworking for it to be great. Best thing to do if you're interested in Battlefleet Gothic is go watch Guerrilla Miniature Games. You will get really to grips with the kind of vibe of that, and it's really cool. The setting, the models, I mean, it's space. I love space games. Just having little clusters of escort dudes flying around. The difficulty with Battlefleet Gothic, it landed, and again, it was only kicking around for a few years, and then it went away to kind of like mail order only. Like you had to know a guy who knew a guy called Clive in a warehouse who could get hold of some of the metal Necrons that were rumoured to have been released. It was a bit like that, which was not ideal, not conducive to making a vibrant set. But because they could tailor this to Imperial versus Chaos or Imperial versus Imperial during the Heresy thing, again, I think this is a game we are very likely to see return. And stylistically, it was gorgeous. Chaos ships and the Imperial ships were similar, but they did have different elements that really gave them an identity. Then there were the Eldar ships, and they were so curvy. They looked a bit like Minbari from Babylon 5, and it was something different. They had the living ships of the Tyranids came along a little bit later. You had the bolted together nonsense of the Orc ships. It was really cool. Each of the fleets had their own identity, and the rule set was good. It could be very good, but the great thing about Battlefleet Gothic is you can pick up the ships 3D printed again, and there are some great companies like Vanguard in the UK that do some not Battlefleet Gothic ships that are just out of this world. Now, I love spaceship gaming, and I have Engage, my own personal game that's on RPG Vault, you know, Wargame Vault, and it's a great game. I love it. So I get my spaceship kicks playing Engage, but if I didn't have Engage, I would be binging Battlefleet Gothic. I've got fleets of this stuff kicking around that I've printed and bought because I love what it could be, and Games Workshop bringing this back would just, I would be in a heartbeat. They have to do a great job bringing it back together again. The game wasn't far off. This would be just printing money for Games Workshop. Anyway, that is my number 2, Battlefleet Gothic. My number 1 is Warhammer Fantasy Battle 6th Edition. This was peak Games Workshop. This was out of the gold era into the platinum era, and sadly was also the start of the fall into madness. Now, 6th edition Warhammer Fantasy Battle. So this is the rank and flank, the old school high elves on 20mm bases. I got a picture of the starter set, and sadly didn't realise that it was just so poor as a graphic, but the starter set was cool. 6th edition Warhammer was when they took a game that was built on flavour a lot, and it was just added to and added to and added to and added to. I started in 3rd edition, which was an awesome book full of spells and nonsense. 4th edition was great. 5th edition was a development of 4th edition, and then they took it and they kind of reforged it Anduril style for 6th edition. One big rulebook, and in that rulebook was a ton of everything. There was a Ravening Hordes book that was given away for free in White Dwarf that had an army list for every single unit in Warhammer, basically. And if it didn't have the rules for that unit, it suggested basically use it as this guy instead. This was the golden age because you could get this game, you had the models, you had this rulebook as a converter, and you could just play what was, realistically, the tightest version of Warhammer ever. Now, Warhammer Fantasy Battle took a while to play a game, it absolutely did, and there is going to be some nostalgia dripping off every one of my choices in this game, in this top 5, but this edition had it all. It had a great magic system. It had a very good rulebook. You understood what was going on, and it nailed down so much of the stuff that was just bloated and unclear, and just put it together in what has to be the best mass combat game that has ever been made. Each of the armies had their own identity, they had their own characterful units, but at the core the units were very similar, so it just flowed. There was tactics to be made, heroes felt heroic, but in this edition they weren't totally broken. It went from Hero Hammer to Middle Hammer, which is where this kind of sits now. 6th edition was an absolute golden age. This is when they started churning out multi-part plastic kits as well. From the kind of 5th into 6th, we got to see all the Empire stuff, the new Orcs landed. Then they did this massive re-release of Skaven, the Clan Rats probably got changed, and then the Gatling guns came out, and then the High Elves got done with multi-part kits. This is when Warhammer got amazing, and if you ever played Total War, this is basically the bit of this. A few editions added some more units, but 6th edition Total War Warhammer, that theme, that build, the way it works and feels is exactly the same. We played millions of this game, millions of games of this game, probably not, but it, you know, we used to just spend the whole flipping day. We'd have like 4 2,000 point battles in a day, and it would be brilliant, and people would make stupid decisions, and it was just awesome. The narrative was brilliant. My high elves were amazing, dwarves were great, orcs and goblins did stupid stuff, the fanatics were wonderful, the giants were great, wyverns were cool, Azhag was flying around on a big fat wyvern casting spells. It was just amazing. And realistically, I will never play a game of Warhammer 6th edition again, not with 28mm models. Games Workshop nuked it. Everything got bigger now, and you just don't want to paint an army of 100+ dudes. So, we have played Warhammer 6th edition with 6mm models, which would work exactly the same with 10mm models. So you can play Warhammer with smaller scales and it works beautifully. And we've done a bunch of this and it is just one of the most fun experiences in gaming. You get some 10mm or 6mm, you build some armies, you have them set on the base, use tiny little dice to track the wounds. It takes a little bit of fudging but not an awful lot, and you get the experience of this. You could give some unit champions different weapons and it was just so much fun. This is without a shadow of a doubt the best Games Workshop game that has ever been made, except for Blood Bowl, which is just perfection. Mostly. 6th edition Warhammer, just everything I've ever wanted in a war game. But that is not all. So that's my top 5. Let's have a look and see what you guys said. And okay, Man of War was mentioned the most frequent, up there with Battlefleet Gothic. And then there's a couple of games that I did not mention, and I feel bad about it, but actually these top 5 they did more for me. Mordheim. Mordheim was a skirmish game set in Warhammer land, and it was really cool, really thematic. You had a warband of dudes and you were raiding this city that got nuked by a comet, and the comet was made of magic warpstone. Basically they stole everything about that game and put it in a terrible opposed mechanic system with Frostgrave. I'm really sorry, I don't like opposed roll games. It's just blah. Mordheim, you built your army, you built your warband, and they leveled up. It was very close. It's basically old Necromunda in Warhammer land, but the warbands were quite thematic. It was all the Empire. You could get some non-human warbands in there as well. It was really cool. It was a really cool system. The starter set was amazing. Had great cardboard buildings. We played a ton of Mordheim as well. A great game, and again, kept pretty healthy by the community. What else did we have? Original Necromunda, yeah, I mean, it was really good. I actually think mechanically the new one is better, even if there's so many models it's kind of hard to keep up with. Loads of votes for Warhammer Fantasy. Warhammer Quest as well, yeah, very cool. Gorka Morka, which was basically Mad Max with Games Workshop's 40k orcs. That was great fun too. Dark Future, which was probably 10mm vehicles running around, again very Mad Maxy. Space Hulk was very popular with you guys as well. I love Space Hulk. Space Hulk's great. Thematic, the models are great. The new edition, or the newer edition, absolutely brilliant. As a game, it's just fine. Again, if you want to watch a playthrough of that, Guerrilla Miniatures Games loves the specialist games. Absolutely. Tons of votes for Epic as well, and Man of War, and a few for Warmaster. The old specialist games that Games Workshop did gave you something different from the main games, and I think it's potentially the reason why we all like Blood Bowl as much as we do. It is a smaller box, but it's a sandbox. There's an easy way to build your identity. Less buy-in, more playtime. And the specialist games were very much like that. And I think, with the exception of my number 1, which was Warhammer Fantasy Battle 6th edition, which I will be playing in a cheap way using 10mm models, they're all just a different way to play, and I absolutely love it. Anyway, guys, I'm going to wrap up. Thank you very much for watching. Let me know in the comments if you agree, disagree, if I've missed anything. Games Workshop really used to make some fantastic games, and I'm very, very, very happy that Adeptus Titanicus has come back in a good way, and Blood Bowl has come back in a very good way. So actually, I'm a very happy Ben. Anyway, thanks very much for watching. We'll be back soon with more actual Blood Bowl content. Happy blocking. Thanks very much for watching. We really appreciate your support. If you want to help support the channel even further, please like and subscribe, or come join us on our Patreon. We have early access to content. We get loads of feedback from you guys, and we try and do competitions as much as we can. Or You can get yourself some Bonehead podcast merch on our Spreadshirt site. So if you want to support a team, especially for the Bonehead Championship, you can pick up a shirt, a mug, things like that. It all helps support the channel and we really appreciate it. Anyway, links below. Thank you very much. Happy blocking.